The silence was deafening. Through her scope, she could see the enemy commander's coffee cup steaming in the morning air, completely unaware that death was watching him from 800 meters away. Her finger rested gently on the trigger, steady as stone, while her heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't just another mission. This single shot would either prove that women belonged on the battlefield or confirm every doubt her male colleagues had whispered behind her back. She had trained for this moment through years of rejection, mockery, and countless nights wondering if she was fighting a losing battle. Now, with the crosshairs perfectly aligned and her breathing controlled, she realized that history was about to be written with the pull of a trigger. The question wasn't whether she could make the shot. She had proven her accuracy 1,000 times over in training. The real question was whether the world was ready to accept that its deadliest sniper wore lipstick under her combat helmet. In a world where women were expected to stay home and tend to domestic duties, she chose to pick up a rifle and redefine what it meant to serve her country. This is the story of how one woman's determination to break through the ultimate boys' club changed military history forever, one impossible shot at a time. Elena Kozlov grew up in the shadow of the Ural Mountains, where winter lasted 8 months and survival meant learning to hunt before you learned to read. Her father, a veteran of the Great War, had no sons to pass his skills to, only a daughter with eyes like steel and hands steadier than a mountain lake at dawn. While other girls her age played with dolls and learned embroidery, Elena spent her afternoons tracking deer through snow-covered forests, learning to read the wind and calculate distance by instinct. The first time she held her father's old Mosin-Nagant rifle, she was barely tall enough to see over the barrel. The weapon seemed enormous in her small hands, but something about its weight felt right, like she had been born to carry it. Her father watched from behind as she lined up her first shot at a tin can placed 50 meters away. The recoil knocked her backward into the snow, but the can flew off its perch with a satisfying clang. Her father's weathered face broke into a rare smile. He had taught dozens of young men to shoot over the years, but none had shown such natural talent. By the time Elena turned 16, she could hit a rabbit at 200 meters in a crosswind. The local hunting competitions became boring for her. She won them so consistently that other participants started complaining it wasn't fair. Her reputation spread throughout the region, and people began calling her the Ghost of the Mountains, because of her ability to remain invisible in the wilderness while tracking her prey. She could lie motionless in the snow for hours, waiting for the perfect shot, her patience rivaling that of the wolves that roamed the same forests. When war clouds began gathering over Europe in the late 1930s, Elena knew her peaceful life in the mountains was about to change. The radio crackled with news of conflicts spreading across borders, and young men from her village started disappearing to military training camps. She watched them march away with a mixture of envy and frustration. They were heading off to serve their country while she was expected to stay behind and tend to household duties like every other woman in the village. The military recruitment office in the nearest town was housed in a drab concrete building that smelled of cigarette smoke and desperation. Elena pushed through the heavy wooden doors on a crisp October morning, her father's hunting rifle slung across her shoulder. The sergeant behind the desk looked up from his paperwork with an expression of amused disbelief. He was a thick-set man with graying temples and the kind of mustache that suggested he took himself very seriously. "Young lady, I think you're in the wrong building," he said, not bothering to hide his condescending tone. "The nursing corps recruitment is down the street." Elena placed her rifle on his desk with a controlled thud that made his coffee cup rattle. "I'm here to join the sniper corps," she said, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had never missed a shot that mattered. The sergeant's laughter filled the room, bouncing off the bare walls like an unwelcome echo. "Sniper corps? Little girl, do you have any idea what snipers do? We're not talking about shooting rabbits for Sunday dinner. We're talking about war. Real war. With real bullets flying in both directions." Elena had expected this reaction. She had rehearsed her response during the long walk from her village, knowing that her words would need to cut through layers of prejudice and assumption. "I can outshoot any man who's walked through that door," she said, her eyes never leaving his. Give me a test. Any test. If I fail, I'll walk out of here and you'll never see me again. The sergeant studied her face, looking for signs of uncertainty or false bravado. What he saw instead was the kind of calm determination that couldn't be faked. Against his better judgment, he found himself intrigued. You're serious about this, aren't you? Dead serious. He leaned back in his chair, considering. The military was always looking for exceptional marksmen, and, if the rumors about this mountain girl were true, she might actually have something to offer. Fine. There's a qualification range about 5 kilometers from here. Be there at dawn tomorrow. Bring your own rifle and 200 rounds of ammunition. If you can outshoot our current best candidate, we'll talk. Elena arrived at the range 30 minutes before sunrise, her breath forming small clouds in the freezing air. The facility was larger than she had expected, with targets set up at various distances stretching out to nearly 1,000 meters. A small group of men huddled around a coffee pot near a wooden shack, their voices carrying across the empty field. They stopped talking when they noticed her approaching. You've got to be kidding me, one of them muttered. They're actually going to let her try? The range officer, a captain with permanent squint lines around his eyes, checked his pocket watch and nodded to Elena. You have 1 hour to complete the standard sniper qualification course. 7 different distances, varying weather conditions, and targets that move. The current record holder managed to hit 86% of his shots. You need at least 75% to pass. Elena nodded and began setting up her shooting position. She had brought her father's rifle, but also a more modern weapon she had purchased with money saved from years of hunting. The men watched with barely concealed skepticism as she adjusted her scope and checked the wind direction with a small flag tied to a nearby post. The first target was stationary at 100 meters, an easy warm-up shot. Elena's bullet found the center ring before the sound of the gunshot had finished echoing across the range. The second target, at 200 meters, fell just as cleanly. By the time she reached the 500-meter mark, the background chatter from the watching soldiers had fallen silent. The most challenging shot came at the end, a target that moved erratically at 800 meters, simulating an enemy soldier trying to avoid detection. Elena lay prone in the dirt, her breathing controlled and methodical. She watched the target's pattern for several minutes, learning its rhythm like a dancer learning choreography. When she finally squeezed the trigger, the bullet found its mark with mathematical precision. The range officer checked his scoring sheet twice before announcing the results. 94% accuracy. That's not just a passing score, it's the highest we've recorded in 3 years of testing. The silence that followed was broken by the slow sound of clapping. Captain Dmitry Volkov stepped forward from the group of observers, a man whose reputation as the Army's finest sniper instructor preceded him wherever he went. He was tall and lean, with the kind of weathered face that suggested he had seen too much combat and not enough peaceful sunsets. I've been training snipers for 15 years, he said, his voice carrying the authority of experience. I've seen men with perfect eyesight miss targets they should have hit easily, and I've seen others with average skills become exceptional through sheer determination. What I just witnessed was different. That wasn't just good shooting, that was natural talent combined with years of practical experience. Elena remained silent, unsure whether she was about to be praised or dismissed. She had learned from her father that in situations like this, it was better to let others do the talking until you understood exactly where you stood. However, Captain Volkov continued, talent alone doesn't make a sniper. The psychological pressure of combat can break even the strongest marksman. The question isn't whether you can hit a target on a peaceful morning at a training range. The question is whether you can do it when someone is shooting back. The captain studied Elena's face, looking for any sign of doubt or hesitation. If you're accepted into this program, you'll undergo 6 months of the most grueling training the military has to offer. Physical conditioning that will push your body to its limits, psychological preparation for the realities of taking human lives, and technical instruction in everything from camouflage to wind calculation. Many men don't survive the program. Those who do become part of an elite unit that operates behind enemy lines with minimal support. Elena met his gaze without flinching. I didn't come here expecting it to be easy. I came here to serve my country in the way I'm best qualified to serve. Captain Volkov nodded slowly. Report to the training facility on Monday morning at 0500 hours. Bring only what you can carry in one bag, everything else will be provided. And, Miss Kozlov? He paused, making sure she was paying attention. Once you walk through those doors, there's no going back. This isn't a game or an adventure. This is preparation for war, and war has a way of changing people in ways they never expected. As Elena walked away from the range that afternoon, she felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension that she had never experienced before. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges that would test not just her shooting skills but her entire identity as a woman in a man's world. But, for the first time in her life, she felt like she was walking towards something that mattered, something that would allow her to use her talents in service of something greater than herself. The sun was setting behind the mountains as she reached her family's small cabin. Her father was waiting on the porch, smoking his evening pipe and watching the deer that grazed in the meadow below their home. He looked up as she approached, his eyes asking the question without words. I start training on Monday, Elena said, setting down her rifle case. Her father nodded slowly, pride and worry competing for space in his weathered features. Your mother would have been proud, he said finally. She always said you had the heart of a warrior. That night, Elena lay in her bed listening to the familiar sounds of the mountain wilderness, wind through the pine trees, the distant call of an owl, the soft footsteps of nocturnal creatures going about their ancient routines. In less than a week, these sounds would be replaced by the harsh reality of military training. She would trade her peaceful mountain home for a world of discipline, challenge, and preparation for combat. But, as she drifted off to sleep, Elena felt no regret about her choice. She had spent her entire life preparing for this moment without even knowing it. Every hour spent tracking game through difficult terrain, every shot taken in challenging weather conditions, every night spent motionless in a hunting blind, it had all been training for what came next. She was ready to become something the military had never seen before, a woman who could kill from a distance with the precision of a master craftsman and the patience of a mountain predator. The military training facility sprawled across a harsh landscape that seemed designed to break spirits before it built them back up stronger. Elena arrived at dawn on Monday morning, her single bag slung over her shoulder, to find herself standing among 37 male recruits who looked at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. The barracks were long, concrete buildings with small windows and the kind of institutional smell that suggested thousands of soldiers had passed through these halls before them. Sergeant Major Boris Petrov stood before the assembled group like a monument to military discipline. He was a man who had earned every scar on his face and every ribbon on his uniform through decades of service that had taken him from training camps to battlefields across 3 different conflicts. His voice carried across the formation like thunder rolling through mountain valleys. Look around you, he commanded. Half of you will not complete this program. Of those who do, some will die in their first month of active service. This is not a game. This is not an adventure. This is preparation for the most dangerous job in the military, and, if you're not absolutely committed to excellence, you should leave now. Elena felt the weight of every stare as the sergeant major's eyes passed over the formation. She had expected to be the center of attention, but the intensity of the scrutiny was more overwhelming than she had anticipated. Some of the men looked at her with genuine curiosity, wondering how she would handle the challenges ahead. Others seemed angry, as if her presence somehow diminished their own accomplishments. A few looked at her with the kind of predatory interest that made her skin crawl. The first week of training focused on physical conditioning that pushed every recruit to their breaking point. Elena had always been strong from years of hiking through mountain terrain, but the military had ways of finding weaknesses she never knew existed. 5-kilometer runs with full packs became 10-kilometer slogs through mud that sucked at their boots like quicksand. Obstacle courses designed to simulate battlefield conditions left everyone bloody and exhausted by the end of each day. Elena quickly learned that being the only woman in the program meant everything she did was scrutinized and judged by different standards. When she struggled with an exercise, it was because women weren't built for combat. When she excelled, it was because the instructors were going easy on her. She couldn't win, so she stopped trying to win over her critics and focused instead on becoming the best soldier she could be. The psychological training proved more challenging than the physical demands. Captain Volkov had been right, shooting targets on a peaceful range was nothing like the mental preparation required for combat. The instructors used every technique they could think of to simulate the stress of battle: sudden loud noises during marksmanship practice, smoke and flashing lights to create confusion, and scenarios where recruits had to make split-second decisions about whether targets were enemy soldiers or innocent civilians. A sniper's greatest weapon isn't her rifle, Captain Volkov explained during one of his evening lectures. It's her mind. The ability to remain calm when everything around you is chaos. The patience to wait hours or even days for the perfect shot. The psychological strength to take a human life from a distance and, then, live with that decision for the rest of your life. Elena found herself particularly drawn to the camouflage and concealment training. Her childhood spent hunting in the mountains had given her an intuitive understanding of how to blend into natural environments, but the military techniques were more sophisticated than anything she had learned from her father. She discovered how to create effective hiding spots in urban environments, how to move through enemy territory without leaving tracks, and how to remain motionless for extended periods while maintaining alertness. The other recruits began to notice her abilities during the third week of training. During a night exercise where they were required to infiltrate a mock enemy position, Elena managed to get within 50 meters of the target without being detected by instructors equipped with night vision equipment. Her success where others had failed earned her grudging respect from some of her fellow trainees, though others became even more resentful. Private Viktor Kozmin was among the most vocal critics of Elena's presence in the program. He was a large man from an industrial city who seemed to take personal offense at the idea that a woman could perform the same tasks he struggled with. During meals, he would make loud comments about how the program was being watered down to accommodate female recruits. During training exercises, he seemed to take particular pleasure in any instance where Elena faced difficulties. The confrontation between them came during the fourth week, after a particularly challenging day of urban warfare simulation. Elena had performed well, successfully completing her assigned mission while several male recruits had failed theirs. As they cleaned their weapons in the armory that evening, Victor's resentment finally boiled over. "Must be nice having the instructors carry you through the program," he said loudly enough for everyone in the room to hear. "Some of us actually have to earn our place here." Elena looked up from her rifle cleaning to find every eye in the room focused on her. This was the moment she had known would come eventually, the moment when she would have to stand up for herself or accept being treated as a second-class participant in the program. Her father had taught her that respect was something you earned through actions, not words, but sometimes words were necessary to make sure people understood what your actions meant. "My scores speak for themselves," she replied calmly, continuing to clean her weapon. "If you have a problem with them, take it up with the instructors." Victor took a step closer, his face flushed with anger. "Your scores don't mean anything when the instructors are grading you differently. Everyone here knows you're getting special treatment." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a bayonet. The other recruits had stopped their own weapon maintenance to watch the confrontation unfold. Elena realized that this moment would define not just her relationship with Victor, but her standing among all her fellow trainees. She set down her cleaning rod and stood up slowly, meeting Victor's gaze without backing down. "Tomorrow is the advanced marksmanship test. 1,000 meters, moving targets, variable wind conditions. If you think I'm getting special treatment, let's settle this the only way that matters. We'll both take the test, and whoever scores higher gets to decide whether this conversation continues." Victor's confidence faltered slightly. Elena's reputation as a marksman had become legendary among the recruits, and challenging her to a shooting contest was like challenging a master chess player to a game of strategy. But, he had backed himself into a corner with his accusations, and, backing down now would cost him face among his peers. "You're on," he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "But, when I beat you, I want you to admit that you don't belong here." Elena nodded. "And, when I beat you, you apologize to everyone in this room for suggesting that I'm not earning my place through merit." The advanced marksmanship test was designed to be the most challenging shooting exercise in the entire program. Targets appeared at random intervals at distances ranging from 600 to 1200 meters, simulating enemy soldiers moving across a battlefield. The scoring system took into account not just accuracy, but also speed of target acquisition and the ability to engage multiple targets in rapid succession. Word of the challenge had spread throughout the training facility, and a small crowd of instructors and recruits gathered to watch the competition. Captain Volkov observed from a position where he could see both shooters, his expression unreadable. Elena knew that her performance would be judged not just by Victor and her fellow recruits, but by the instructors who would ultimately decide whether she was ready for active duty. Victor went first, and Elena had to admit that he was a skilled marksman. His shots were precise and well-placed, and he managed to engage targets quickly enough to maintain a good overall score. When the exercise ended, he had achieved an 82% accuracy rate, a score that would have been impressive under normal circumstances. Elena approached her shooting position with the kind of calm confidence that had served her well throughout her life. She had learned from watching Victor's performance, noting how the wind patterns affected bullet trajectory and identifying the timing patterns of the moving targets. When the exercise began, she felt herself slip into the focused mental state that had made her such an effective hunter in the mountains. Her first shot found its mark at 800 meters, dropping a target that had been visible for less than 3 seconds. The second and third targets fell in rapid succession, each bullet placed with surgical precision. As the exercise continued, Elena felt herself entering a zone where time seemed to slow down and every variable became crystal clear in her mind. When the final target fell, the range fell silent except for the sound of wind moving across the empty landscape. The scoring officer checked his instruments twice before announcing the results. Elena had achieved a 96% accuracy rate, hitting targets that several instructors admitted they might have missed. Victor stood frozen at his shooting position, staring at the distant targets that Elena had hit with such devastating effectiveness. His face showed a mixture of disbelief and grudging admiration. He had been genuinely convinced that Elena's reputation was exaggerated, that her previous successes had been the result of favorable conditions or instructor bias. Now he was forced to confront the reality that she was simply a better marksman than he was. Captain Volkov approached Victor with an expression that suggested he had something important to say. "Private Kosmin, you're a good soldier and a competent marksman. But, you've just learned an important lesson about making assumptions based on prejudice rather than evidence. Miss Kozlov has earned her place in this program through the same merit and skill that got you here. I suggest you remember that going forward." Victor nodded slowly, then walked over to where Elena was cleaning her rifle. The entire group watched as he struggled to find the right words for what he needed to say. "I apologize," he said finally, his voice carrying genuine regret. "You've proven that you belong here more than some of us who never had our qualifications questioned." The incident marked a turning point in Elena's relationship with her fellow recruits. She would never be fully accepted by all of them, some prejudices ran too deep to be eliminated by a single demonstration of skill. But, she had earned something more valuable than popularity, she had earned respect. The men who had questioned her abilities now questioned their own assumptions instead. The final phase of training focused on real-world application of sniper skills. Recruits were sent on extended exercises that simulated actual combat missions, complete with live ammunition and scenarios that required them to make life-or-death decisions under extreme pressure. Elena found herself assigned to increasingly complex missions that tested not just her marksmanship, but her ability to operate independently behind enemy lines. During one particularly challenging exercise, she was tasked with infiltrating a mock enemy installation and eliminating a high-value target without being detected by roving patrols. The exercise area covered 50 square kilometers of forest and urban terrain, and she had 48 hours to complete the mission using only the equipment she could carry. Elena approached the mission with the same methodical planning that had made her successful as a hunter. She spent the first 12 hours conducting reconnaissance, learning the patrol patterns and identifying the best positions for both the shot and her subsequent escape route. She found a position in an abandoned building that provided clear sight lines to the target area while offering multiple exit routes if her position was compromised. The actual shot came after 36 hours of patient waiting. Elena had remained motionless in her chosen position for over 18 hours, observing the target area and waiting for the perfect opportunity. When her target finally appeared, she had less than 10 seconds to acquire him, calculate the range and wind conditions, and take the shot before he disappeared behind cover. Her bullet found its mark at 750 meters, dropping the target with a single shot. The exercise controllers later admitted that they had made the scenario intentionally difficult, expecting most recruits to fail or require multiple attempts. Elena's success on the first try, combined with her ability to extract from the area without detection, earned her the highest score ever recorded in the exercise. Captain Volkov called her into his office the morning after the exercise for what he described as her final evaluation interview. His office was Spartan and functional, decorated only with a few photographs of soldiers who had served under his command and a map showing the locations where he had served during his long career. "In 6 months of training, you've exceeded every standard we set for sniper qualification," he began without preamble. "Your marksmanship is exceptional, your fieldcraft is intuitive, and your psychological profile indicates that you have the mental strength required for this type of work. By every measure we use to evaluate potential snipers, you're ready for active duty." Elena waited for the qualification that she sensed was coming. In her experience, conversations that started with praise usually included a significant, but somewhere in the middle. However, Captain Volkov continued, "There's still the question of how you'll be accepted by the regular military units you'll be assigned to support. Some commanders may be reluctant to rely on intelligence provided by a female operative. Some soldiers may question orders that come from missions you've completed. These aren't reflections on your abilities, they're reflections on attitudes that exist throughout the military." Elena had expected this conversation. She had spent months preparing not just for the technical demands of being a sniper, but for the social and political challenges that would come with being the first woman in this role. "I understand the concerns," she replied. "But I also know that success in the field has a way of changing attitudes. If I can prove that I can complete missions that save the lives of other soldiers, I think acceptance will follow." Captain Volkov nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the attitude that will make you successful. You're going to face challenges that your male counterparts never encounter, but you're also going to have opportunities to prove things that no one else has had the chance to prove. Your first assignment will be with the 47th Infantry Division. They're scheduled to deploy to an active combat zone within the month." As Elena left Captain Volkov's office that afternoon, she felt a mixture of pride and apprehension that reminded her of the day she had first approached the military recruitment office. She had successfully completed the most demanding training program the military offered, proving that women could excel in roles that had previously been considered exclusively male domains. But the real test was still ahead of her, in the chaos and uncertainty of actual combat where there would be no second chances and no opportunity to repeat failed exercises. The 47th Infantry Division's forward operating base sat like a concrete scar on the landscape, surrounded by razor wire and watchtowers that watched over a hostile territory where every shadow could hide an enemy sniper. Elena arrived at the base on a gray October morning, her sniper rifle case and personal gear marking her as the new addition that everyone had been talking about for weeks. The soldiers she passed on her way to the command post offered a mixture of curious stares and skeptical glances that had become familiar during her training. Colonel Alexander Petrov greeted her in his office with the kind of professional courtesy that masked deeper reservations. He was a career officer who had earned his rank through 30 years of service that had taken him from junior lieutenant to divisional commander. His office walls were covered with maps showing enemy positions, supply routes, and terrain features that could mean the difference between successful missions and catastrophic failures. "Miss Kozlov," he said, gesturing for her to take a seat across from his desk. "Your reputation precedes you. Captain Volkov speaks very highly of your abilities, and your training scores are impressive. However, I'm sure you understand that this deployment will be different from anything you've experienced in training exercises." Elena nodded, recognizing the careful tone of a commander who was trying to balance military necessity with personal doubts about her capabilities. "I understand, sir. I'm ready to prove that my training has prepared me for real combat situations." The colonel studied her face, looking for signs of overconfidence or uncertainty that might indicate she wasn't ready for the responsibilities ahead. What he saw instead was the same calm determination that had impressed her instructors throughout the training program. "Your first assignment will be intelligence gathering. We've received reports of enemy movement in the eastern sector, but we need precise information about their positions and strength before we can plan any offensive operations." The mission briefing took place in a windowless room where maps and photographs covered every available surface. Elena found herself surrounded by officers who had spent months studying the local terrain and enemy tactics. The intelligence they had was incomplete and potentially outdated, creating a situation where accurate reconnaissance could save hundreds of lives. "The target area is approximately 15 kilometers northeast of our position," the intelligence officer explained, pointing to a section of the map marked with red symbols indicating suspected enemy positions. "Satellite imagery suggests they've established a supply depot in this valley, but we need visual confirmation of their defensive positions before we can determine the best approach for an assault." Elena studied the topographical maps with the same attention to detail she had once applied to hunting grounds in the mountains. The terrain was challenging but offered several potential observation positions that would provide good sight lines while maintaining concealment. The main difficulty would be reaching those positions without being detected by enemy patrols that were known to operate throughout the area. "How long do I have for the reconnaissance?" she asked, already formulating a plan that would take advantage of the terrain features she had identified. 72 hours, the colonel replied. "After that, we'll proceed with the assault based on whatever information we have available. I don't need to tell you that incomplete intelligence could result in significant casualties among our forces." Elena spent the remainder of the day studying aerial photographs and intelligence reports, familiarizing herself with every detail of the terrain she would be operating in. She requested specific equipment that would allow her to remain in the field for extended periods while maintaining the mobility necessary to avoid detection. Her years of experience hunting in wilderness areas had taught her that successful reconnaissance required patience and adaptability in equal measure. She departed the base at midnight, using the cover of darkness to move through the initial stages of her infiltration route. The terrain was rockier and more vertical than the mountains she had grown up in, but the principles of concealed movement remained the same. She traveled light, carrying only essential equipment and enough supplies to sustain her for 4 days if the mission took longer than expected. By dawn, she had reached a ridge line that provided an excellent view of the suspected enemy position. Through her spotting scope, she could see clear evidence of military activity in the valley below, vehicles moving along concealed roads, sentries posted at strategic positions, and the kind of organized defensive preparations that indicated a significant enemy presence. Elena established her observation post in a cluster of rocks that provided natural camouflage while offering clear sight lines to the enemy position. She settled in for what she knew would be a long period of patient observation, documenting every detail of enemy movements and defensive preparations. Her training had taught her that successful intelligence gathering required more than just identifying targets, it required understanding patterns of behavior that could reveal weaknesses in enemy defenses. Over the next 36 hours, she compiled a detailed picture of enemy operations in the valley. She counted vehicles, identified weapon positions, and mapped patrol routes that would need to be neutralized before any assault could succeed. Her notes filled a small waterproof notebook with sketches and observations that would provide invaluable intelligence for mission planning. The critical moment came on the second night, when she observed a convoy of vehicles arriving at the enemy position under cover of darkness. Through her night vision equipment, she could see that the convoy included several high-ranking officers who seemed to be conducting an inspection of the defensive positions. This was the kind of intelligence opportunity that could significantly impact the success of future operations. Elena carefully documented the officers' inspection route, noting which positions they spent the most time examining and which areas seemed to receive the most attention. She observed what appeared to be a heated discussion between two senior officers about the placement of defensive positions, information that could provide insights into potential weaknesses in their defensive plan. As she prepared to return to base with her intelligence, Elena noticed increased patrol activity in the area around her position. Enemy soldiers were conducting systematic searches of the ridge lines, moving in patterns that suggested they suspected the presence of observers. She realized that remaining in her current position was no longer safe, but extracting without being detected would require careful planning and perfect timing. Elena waited until the patrol closest to her position had moved past her hiding spot before beginning her withdrawal. She moved slowly and carefully, using terrain features to mask her movement while maintaining constant awareness of enemy positions. The extraction route she had planned during her initial infiltration proved its value, allowing her to move away from the enemy position without exposing herself to detection. She reached the base perimeter as dawn was breaking over the eastern horizon, exhausted but carrying intelligence that would prove crucial for the upcoming assault. The debriefing session lasted 4 hours, with intelligence officers asking detailed questions about everything she had observed. Her sketches and notes were immediately incorporated into the operational plan, providing the kind of precise information that had been missing from their previous intelligence. Colonel Petrov called her into his office after the debriefing to discuss her next assignment. His manner was noticeably different from their first meeting. The professional courtesy remained, but it was now backed by genuine respect for her capabilities. "Your reconnaissance provided exactly the information we needed," he said. "The assault is scheduled for tomorrow night, and we'll be able to neutralize their defensive positions because we know exactly where they're located." Elena felt a sense of satisfaction at having successfully completed her first real combat mission, but she also knew that reconnaissance was only the beginning of her role as a military sniper. The intelligence she had gathered would save lives during the assault, but there would be other situations where her primary weapon would be her rifle rather than her observation skills. "There's another mission I want to discuss with you," the colonel continued. "Our intelligence indicates that enemy forces in this region are being coordinated by a senior officer who has been responsible for several successful attacks on our supply convoys. We've been trying to locate him for months, but he's proven extremely elusive." Elena listened carefully as the colonel explained the details of what he was proposing. The enemy officer was known to travel between different positions, never staying in one location long enough to be targeted by conventional forces. His security measures were extensive, and previous attempts to eliminate him had failed because of his unpredictable movement patterns. "This type of target requires a different approach," the colonel explained. "We need someone who can position themselves along his likely travel routes and wait for an opportunity that might only last a few seconds. It's the kind of mission that requires exceptional patience and marksmanship skills." Elena understood that this was the moment Captain Volkov had prepared her for during training. Everything she had learned about camouflage, concealment, and long-range marksmanship would be tested in a situation where failure could mean not just mission failure, but discovery and capture behind enemy lines. "I'm ready for the mission," she replied, already beginning to think through the tactical considerations that would determine success or failure. "How much intelligence do we have about his movement patterns?" The planning session for the assassination mission lasted through the night, with Elena studying maps, photographs, and intelligence reports that detailed the target's known habits and security procedures. The enemy officer was careful and professional, but, like all human beings, he had patterns of behavior that could be exploited by someone patient enough to wait for the right opportunity. Elena identified 3 potential ambush positions along routes the target was known to use. Each position offered advantages and disadvantages that would need to be weighed against the specific circumstances when the opportunity arose. The key would be positioning herself where she could observe multiple routes while remaining concealed from enemy security forces. The mission began before dawn 3 days later, with Elena moving through enemy territory toward the ambush site she had selected. The position was located on a hillside that overlooked a road junction where intelligence suggested the target was likely to appear within the next 48 hours. The site offered excellent concealment and multiple escape routes while providing clear sight lines to the target area. Elena established her sniper position with the methodical care that had become second nature during her training. She created a hide that would be invisible from ground level while allowing her to observe the road junction through her rifle scope. The position was uncomfortable but secure, allowing her to remain motionless for extended periods while maintaining alertness and readiness to engage targets. 28 hours passed before her target appeared. Elena first noticed the dust cloud raised by approaching vehicles, then identified the convoy through her spotting scope. The security measures were extensive: multiple vehicles, advanced scouts, and communication equipment that suggested this was indeed the high-value target she had been sent to eliminate. Through her rifle scope, Elena could see the officer in the second vehicle of the convoy. He was a middle-aged man with the bearing of a professional soldier, wearing the kind of uniform decorations that indicated extensive combat experience. For a moment, she found herself thinking about the fact that this man probably had a family, perhaps children who would never see their father again after she pulled the trigger. But, Elena pushed those thoughts aside, focusing instead on the technical aspects of the shot she was about to take. The range was approximately 600 meters, well within her capabilities but challenging enough to require perfect execution. The wind was variable, requiring careful timing to ensure the bullet would find its mark. The target would only be visible for a few seconds as the convoy passed through her kill zone. Elena controlled her breathing, feeling her heart rate slow to the steady rhythm that had served her well throughout her training. Her finger found the trigger, applying steady pressure while she tracked the target vehicle through her scope. The crosshairs aligned perfectly with her target just as the convoy reached the optimal position for the shot. The rifle recoiled against her shoulder with familiar precision, and Elena watched through her scope as the bullet found its mark. The enemy officer slumped forward in his seat, and the convoy immediately erupted into chaos as security personnel tried to determine where the shot had come from. But, Elena was already beginning her extraction, moving quickly away from her firing position while the enemy forces were still trying to understand what had happened. She reached the base perimeter 18 hours later, having successfully completed the most challenging mission of her military career. The intelligence reports that followed confirmed that the enemy officer had been eliminated, disrupting coordination of enemy forces throughout the region. More importantly for Elena's career, word of her successful assassination mission spread throughout the military, establishing her reputation as a sniper capable of completing the most difficult assignments. Colonel Petrov's final evaluation meeting with Elena took place in his office on a sunny afternoon that seemed somehow inappropriate for discussing the realities of combat. He had received official confirmation that her mission had been successful, along with orders transferring her to a special operations unit where her unique skills could be utilized more effectively. "Your performance during this deployment has exceeded every expectation," he told her. "The reconnaissance intelligence you provided was crucial for the success of our assault operations, and your elimination of the enemy commander has significantly reduced their effectiveness in this region. You've proven that excellence in military operations has nothing to do with gender and everything to do with skill, dedication, and courage." Elena felt a sense of completion that was different from anything she had experienced during training. She had successfully transitioned from student to practitioner, proving that her abilities could make a real difference in combat situations. But, more importantly, she had opened doors for other women who would follow in her footsteps, demonstrating that military effectiveness was based on merit rather than assumptions about gender roles. As she prepared to leave the base for her next assignment, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought her from the mountains of her childhood to the battlefields where she had proven herself as a soldier. The path had been difficult, filled with challenges that went far beyond the technical demands of military service. She had faced skepticism, prejudice, and doubt from others, but, more importantly, she had faced her own uncertainties about whether she could succeed in a role that had never been filled by a woman. The answer to those doubts lay in the missions she had completed and the lives she had saved through her actions. Elena had become more than just the first female military sniper, she had become a symbol of what was possible when determination and skill were allowed to overcome traditional barriers. The shot that had eliminated the enemy commander would be remembered as the moment when assumptions about women in combat were finally put to rest, replaced by recognition that excellence in military service knew no gender boundaries. Her legend was just beginning to spread through military circles, carried by soldiers who had witnessed her capabilities firsthand and officers who had seen the results of her missions. But, Elena knew that legends were less important than the practical reality of what she had accomplished. She had proven that women could excel in the most demanding military roles, opening opportunities for future generations who would no longer have to fight the same battles for acceptance that she had faced. The war would continue, and Elena would continue to serve, but the most important victory had already been won. She had broken barriers that many had considered unbreakable, proving that courage, skill, and dedication were the only qualifications that truly mattered in military service. The shot that made her legendary was just the beginning of a career that would redefine what was possible for women in combat roles.